Great. And we look forward to having some discussion at the end. So this is our first global health education program that is virtual. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the epidemic, silent epidemic, and the plight of human trafficking with women, and in relationship to empowerment of women and social enterprise, and also the personal connections that we have with the sex workers in Bangladesh. So first of all, what is human trafficking? It is trafficking in persons is really related to the recruitment and transportation and harboring of people by means of a threat or the use of force and coercion, of abduction, and sometimes it's giving or receiving payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person so that they can have control over them. And human trafficking is a very profitable and lucrative business here, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And the global human trafficking rate has significantly risen over the past decade, especially in Southeast Asia. Bangladesh, Thailand, and Malaysia have earned a really bad name as they transit women and children all over the world. And it mostly affects the poor and uneducated women and children that are falling prey to all these crime networks. And there are many forms of human trafficking, which can include things like sex work, which we're going to focus in on, and bonded labor, debt bondage, especially among migrant laborers, and domestic servitude, involuntarily, forced child labor, child soldiers, child sex trafficking. So it's a persistent global problem that's affecting millions of people everywhere in the world. And it affects both men and women, although mostly women are more often targeted for the sex industry. And there are more than 5.5 million children that are trafficked worldwide, with a total of 20 million that are trafficked in our whole world. Human trafficking is a $150 billion industry, and it's bigger than Google, Starbucks, Nike, and the NFL combined. But we are only spending, and this is the United States, about 120 million in fighting this billion-dollar industry. And it's one of the fastest growing criminal enterprises in the world. So victims are everywhere. And as you can see on this slide, the majority of those victims are in Southeast Asia. And yet at the same, with 11.7 million people. But you look at the United States, just in North America, we have 1.5 million people that are being trafficked every year. So it's a pretty dramatic number of people that are involved in this trafficking problem. So there are many lies versus the myths of human trafficking. And for example, human trafficking and prostitution are completely unrelated. And that's not necessarily true, because some prostitution in some cases is also human trafficking, and they force people to go out on the street to become prostitutes. And human trafficking happens to poor people or people with no education. And yes, that's one of the biggest risk factors, but anyone can become a victim of human trafficking, and that does happen. Human trafficking must involve violence and confinement, and that's also very true, but a lot of it is based solely on deceit and psychological and manipulation, and many times threat of violence to the individual. It's well known, sex trafficking is well known in the developed world, like here in Europe and in Australia and in the United States, but people that live in the remote areas of the developing world really don't understand this, and they think that they are being recruited for a job, and they end up being raped and sold into slavery. So we have some shocking statistics in our country, with 300,000 girls underage being sold for sex in the United States a year. And that age of the girls being trafficked are 12 to 14 years, and this happens 15 times a day, which is just here in the United States, let alone what's happening in our world. So victims of sex trafficking, it's an illegal trafficking of human beings for sexual exploitation. And as I mentioned, it's one of the growing criminal enterprises in the world. And 96% of the victims are women and girls. But you can also see on this slide that there are other issues associated with trafficking that are forced labor, organ removal. I mean, that is when people are found and then they've been forced to take out a kidney or have the kidney sold, et cetera. So there are forced labor for men and boys, but there are many other ways that people have been forced into exploitation. So 158 countries in the world actually have laws against sex trafficking, but in most countries, sex trafficking is still widely legal and socially acceptable. Many countries have these laws that will criminalize the activity, but they also legalize the sex trade in many ways. And they either punish those who are being exploited or openly promote the exploitation by giving traffickers, pimps, and brothel owners a safe place to operate. So in this slide, we talk about the government involvement here and it's divided up in tiers 1, 2, and 3. And the map shows the government action to combat sex trafficking and human trafficking and modern slavery in 177 countries in tier 1. And tier 1 indicates that a state government has recognized the problem and has made the efforts to address the situation in their country through the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And those countries are included in the green section that you can see, which is mostly, as I mentioned, Australia, Europe, and North America. If you look at tier 2, they have not met the standards, but they're making some sort of an effort. And tier 3, which are the bright red sections, which show up where Bangladesh is and Myanmar and Southeast Asia, along with countries in Africa, such as Congo and Ethiopia and South Sudan, and then over in the western part of Africa. And then you have the Middle East and Saudi Arabia and Iran and Afghanistan and Syria. These are major places where sex trafficking, where their governments have not participated in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act to try to figure out how to handle this. So Myanmar, in March of 2016, I was there. And this was just before the time when the government started killing all of the Islamic people, and many of them, close to 1 million of them, fled to Bangladesh to avoid persecution. But this is an example of a young girl that had been married off early because families many times cannot afford to feed everybody. So they marry off these young girls and they're taken away and never to be heard from again. So sex trafficking impacts the economics of a country, and it splinters families, it distorts global markets, it undermines the whole rule of law in a country, and it creates international criminal activities. It also threatens public safety. And worst of all, it robs human beings of their freedom and their dignity. So women empowerment, we want to talk a little bit about how we break this cycle of sex trafficking and other issues that are going on against women and children. And we do that by empowering women to participate fully in an economic life across all different sectors in order to build stronger economies so that our global market is productive. And women have the power to do this. Women want to create sustainability. They want to create a good quality of life for themselves and their families. And in many countries, there are at least 4 in 10 in the labor force that are women, 40% of those women. But in Southeast Asia, it's actually considerably lower at 22%. And you can see that the global economy is impacted if women do not work. So these are some of the UN principles in relationship to empowerment principles that can be implemented to help women be successful and feel more empowered. Empowerment can be defined based on the UN report. It helps people gain control over their own lives, and it refers to women's ability to make strategic life decisions and choices where in the past they didn't have that ability to do so. So it involves the action of boosting women through literacy, through education, through training and raising an awareness. And we all know that the ratio of girls is less as compared to the number of boys in a country. And like India, for example, and it's many times that it is due to the society view as to they all want to have boys like in India and China and not the girls. And in many instances, the patriarchy in society has really decided the course of women's lives throughout the ages. So the need for women empowerment arose because of all of this discrimination and the male domination in many societies in our world. And women became suppressed by their family members and by the societies in which they lived. So social evils started developing like child marriage early on and the dowry system, which has worsened the situation far more for women. But if the benefits of women empowerment can lead their lives, can help their lives to be led with dignity and freedom, it adds to their self-esteem and gives them self-confidence. It gives them a distinct identity of their own, and they become financially independent and they're able to spend it on their needs and take care of their families. And they're able to make meaningful contributions to the well-being of society. And that's what's really important about this. So why is it so important? Because we have injustice and gender bias and inequalities that cannot be removed without women's empowerment. Women cannot enjoy security and protection if they are not empowered. It provides them with a safe working environment. It acts as a powerful tool against exploitation. And women cannot develop their own identity if they are not empowered. And women make up a big chunk of the world's population. So if they aren't employed, then the whole global economy of that particular country is adversely affected. So who are these empowered women? So I want to talk about this lady who is Edna Adan. And she is someone that has been worked really hard for women's empowerment in Somaliland. Somaliland is now a separate country on the Horn of Africa. It is independent, but it's not recognized as by the international community because they're not recognized as a country, so they don't receive any aid from the United States or other countries, but they have survived on their own and they built a functioning government and work opportunities and created a really solid healthcare system, mostly over the years because of this woman, Edna Adan. She was born in Somaliland. She was born in Somalia when Somaliland was also part of Somalia as we know it today. She was born in 1937 and she's one of the foremost pioneers in nursing, health, education, and women's rights in her country. She taught herself how to read at 7 and she went on to school in the UK and became the first certified midwife for Somalia in the past. And as her country was swept up they had a big war, she became the first lady of Somalia and a cabinet member and traveled the world. She eventually divorced. She was imprisoned. She was out of prison. She never had any children. She took a job working for the World Bank. She then worked for WHO, developing a variety of different programs that impacted the health and education for women throughout Africa before she returned to Somaliland in the late 90s. And then she worked to raise the funds to start her own hospital, the Edna Adan University Maternity Hospital. And now she has a university where they have medical students and a medical school and a nursing school and an incredible midwifery school. So she has worked really hard to empower women and been an outspoken person about women's rights. I had the opportunity to meet her and visited her in Somaliland at Christmas time of 2019. And it was an incredible experience to meet the staff and to visit her hospital. And we have plans at some point in time to provide a medical mission, a GYN focused, OB focused medical mission for her clinics that she runs on the outside of Higazi, where her big hospital is located. And we hope to do that in 2020 or 2021 or 2022. She used to come back and forth to the United States, and we hope that when she does come back here, she will come to Maine, and she will be one of our global health education speakers. So we want to talk now a little bit about microfinance and how that empowers women. So how does that really work? So there are many women empowerment programs in the world these days, and where women are trained to form self-organized and self-managed groups. And they usually consist of about 15 to 25 women. Some men are in these groups, but mostly women, to develop their own individual empowerment and increase their access to financial resources, which is really crucial to eliminating poverty. One of the first microfinance organizations was started in Bangladesh by Muhammad Yunus. And Muhammad Yunus is in his 80s now, but there have been several books that he has written about microfinance and how to empower the poor so that they can get out of poverty and start their own small enterprise. It's a self-supervising unit with each member is jointly responsible for everyone else's loan. And they stagger the loans. So if two cannot repay the loan, then the next two would not get a loan. And so people come to the meeting and they have a proposal, and they might need $100 to buy a cow because they want to establish a milk industry or whatever they might be interested in. The reason this developed over time was that none of the poor people had any credit. So they couldn't go to a bank and get the loan. And so Muhammad Yunus started this bank for the poor through microfinance and charged a little bit of interest for the loan, and found that with the group support, that the majority of the people, like 95% of the people, paid the loan back, which was really incredible. And this really impacts the group because they also participate in life skills training, discuss issues of mutual interest like healthcare. They figure out how to have a common fund, and they put some money into the common fund so that it can help people that might be in an accident or people that have been in a disaster situation. And they're also educated about putting some money aside for savings. And so they start this small business like a sewing trade or goats or chickens, raising chickens. And this whole thing has taken off. So the members take the loans out and they repay the loans and they have found that it has helped the plight of women in our world who lack opportunities for improvement. The majority of the women in these majority of the people in microfinance are women. And most of the microfinance units are organized and operated by women. And they have a really high percentage rate as compared to the men in the developing world. So Ethiopia, this is a microfinance with bees, and many countries are achieving this equality in health outcomes, and in primary school enrollment rates have increased because of this. And the world has not really seen this kind of progress when it comes to equality and economic opportunity because it was never there before for women. They are consistently behind men in the formal labor force, and they consistently had no access to credit. They couldn't save anything because they didn't have a job and they weren't able to make any money. And so with microfinance, they have been able to do this. And this has accelerated the development of economies and the development of educated women and children, and simultaneously has helped to reduce poverty. Poverty still exists. You can walk down any back road in many of these countries that Partners for World Health visits on its medical missions and still see incredible poverty, but there has also been incredible growth in the last 20 years with microfinance. The Gameen Bank is the bank that Muhammad Yunus started. And this was a bank, as I mentioned, that would lend money to the poor. And as a result of this, you can develop a business and educate yourself and make sure that your children are educated, have food available for your family, as well as a roof over your head. So another one is the DECA Development Society, which helps poor women in Pradesh, India, and it facilitates a network of women that are seed keepers, and they work to exchange seeds that will then go and be planted. And so this has been going on for a long time in India. So Muhammad Yunus's social empowerment, the Gameen Bank, et cetera, with the social enterprise has really grown over time. And women, the UN talks about sustainability with the environment, and women are key managers of the natural resources and the very powerful agents of change, especially if they have success, even with a small business such as a seed keeper. And the research has shown that rural women in Liberia and the work that's been done in Somalia show how women can actually have direct impact on natural resources and grow the economy. So women's empowerment and poverty. So poverty sometimes pushes women into the sex industry. And it's argued that we're not going to reduce poverty without working to achieve equality among men and women. And women's empowerment helps to curb the inequality that has been existing for a long time. Women always often have to walk for hours to get water and food to feed their families. For example, in Burundi, the women, when I visited there a couple of years ago, were walking 2 to 3 hours and then lugging home branches of wood on their backs without any shoes on these dirt roads and dirt sides of the roads to bring things home for their families. So it's really an an inequitable situation for women when it comes to comparing men and women. So there's a big gap between men and women is one of these major discriminations that persists in most of these countries. And women experience, 1 in 3 women experience more physical and sexual violence, and 133 million girls and women have suffered female genital mutilation as well. So it's really important to think about how we can empower women and get them out of poverty. Because if there's no way to make a living to help take care of their children, many of them end up in the sex trade. So poverty is worse for women, and global poverty affects people of all ages, but it is definitely worse for women. And one way to lift people out of poverty is education. And this will help to stimulate economic growth. Girls are systemically in many countries denied education more often than boys, which results in women that do not have the ability to read or write, therefore not have the ability to engage in employment. So it's really important that we educate women. And there are 4 ways of reducing poverty by educating women that has an impact. So educated women tend to get married later and give birth to healthier babies. And if you're uneducated, your family may marry you off, or you may be married at between the ages of 15 and 19, and there's an increased incidence of maternal child death and infant mortality as well, the earlier women marry. Educated women almost always are paid more than uneducated women, and educating women will empower them to seek more of an ambitious type of work opportunity, and because they'll be able to read and write. And we know that from our country, if we think about reading and writing, it's second nature for us. That's what we learn in school. But in so many other parts of the world, that doesn't happen. So poverty is a cycle. It's an unwanted gift that comes down from generation to generation, and poor families tend to live with other poor families, and they create an impoverished community. And we want to work to decrease that by providing educated women that are more likely to value education and see the benefit, see the chances that their children will have to escape the generational poverty. And women are also more likely to remain in the communities where they are, and education will better equip them to give back. And it's estimated in some countries that they sustain more than $1 billion in losses as a result of inadequately educating girls. Educating women can really reduce poverty by empowering them to rise above where they are now and accepting leadership roles and making decisions about their community. So we want to talk now a little bit about the madams. These are the madams in the Kandapara Brothel. So the Kandapara Brothel is located in Tangai in Bangladesh. It's about a 4-hour drive from Dhaka city. And we were there providing an educational primary care mission in another part of the country. And we met this British man, an Australian, married to the ambassador from Sweden. And he worked for UN AIDS and had done some work in the Tangai brothel and asked us if we wanted to visit. And of course I said yes. So I went there in 2013. And these are the madams. There are 4, 5, 6 madams. There are 7 madams in the Tangai brothel. And they were really hesitant when we arrived, but they warmed up and we were there for 2 or 3 hours. They showed us all around and we asked them, what they wanted, what could we do? We'd be willing to come back next year and provide some healthcare, whatever they were interested in, to the women in the brothel. And their biggest request was healthcare because they're treated so disrespectfully by the hospital and in the community when they leave the brothel. So we have gone back there now since 2000. We went there for a tour in 2013 and we started our medical mission work in 2014 in the brothel. And we have been there ever since, and we provide healthcare services for free to the sex workers and their children. And so we have a really unique relationship that has developed with the sex workers. This is an area where we provide our primary care services. There are little kind of rooms behind where that PWH sign is. And we provide services like wound care and hypertension, diabetes, social and psych support. And this is an educational presentation talking about sex education, the use of condoms. And of course, the brothel ladies know a lot about sex education, I must say. And as they'll say to us, no condom, no sex. And most of them are pretty adamant about this, especially the older one, not necessarily the young ones that are in their teens. So there's a huge need for education about a variety of different topics. Like they don't understand things about diabetes and hypertension. And when a sex worker shows up with a blood pressure of 210 over 120, she could have a stroke. And who's going to take care of her? So there are all of these issues that happen in the brothel. And when we arrive at the brothel, especially now, because they all know that we're coming, they are welcoming us. I mean, 50 of them could be out there clapping and singing, and they're all excited that we're there for 6 days. It's an incredible experience, and we provide that educational opportunity and primary care services in March of every year. We try to go there in March to the brothel. Obviously, we couldn't go this past year in 2020. We hope that we'll be able to do it in 2021 in March. If not, we will try to do it in October of next year. So this is an overview of standing across the street and looking down at the brothel. It's like a big football field. And the picture that you see on the left with the kind of tall building that hasn't been finished, that's kind of like a big party room. And the men will come in and as it starts to get dark and head up there, and there'll be women. But as you look, or girls, I might add, this is a brothel that has sex workers that are 13, 14 years old. And if you look on the picture on the right, you'll see this vast number of metal roofs, and then you see the doors where the brick is, and that's where you enter into the brothel. And those roofs are covering the little places where they live. So it's like the size of a football field, as you can see from this photograph. And you can see the rickshaws and the tuk-tuks that they call them, that are motorized vehicles that can carry 4 or 6 people, maybe even more sometimes. So Bangladesh is one of the few Muslim countries in the world where prostitution is legal. And the Kandapara Brothel is in the district of Tangai, and it's the oldest, one of the oldest and the second largest in the country. There are about 750 sex workers plus their children in the brothel, and it has existed for over 200 years. In 2014, it was demolished because of the landlord, the man who owned the land didn't want the sex workers there anymore, and so they were told to move out within 24 hours, and they banded together, and they were able to demonstrate they demonstrated for their rights as sex workers. And at the end of 2014, the Bangladesh National Women's Lawyers Association convinced the High Court that the eviction of the sex workers was an illegal act, and as a result of that, the sex workers were allowed they all moved back into the brothel. Now, some of those people, of which I will show you some, moved to a different area and decided not to come back to the brothel, but the majority of them came back. This area is the brothel district. It's surrounded by a big brick wall, and it has narrow streets inside. There are food stores and stalls and tea shops and street vendors inside the brothel. And inside the brothel, the women you would think that they are very weak, but they're not. They're very powerful, and they have a loud voice, and they don't put up with anything. They're very, but the ones that are the most vulnerable are the young sex workers that enter the brothel. And those are young girls that might come in at age 10. They could come in as a teenager. They are called a bonded girl, and they are usually put to work as a sex worker from around 12 to 14 years old. These girls owe a debt. It might have been a street girl that had didn't have a place to go, and somebody saw this girl and said, well, I'll give you some food. And so they feed them dinner, and then they take them to the brothel, and the child belongs to the madam, and then they end up becoming bonded, and they owe huge debt, which takes many years to pay off. They come from poor families. Many of them are on the street. They have no freedoms and no rights, and they belong to a madam, and they have large debts and not allowed to go outside or keep most of their money. And when they've paid off their debts, which could take between 2 to 5 years, they then are independent sex workers, and they can refuse customers at that point and keep their own money. And from the moment that the woman has paid the debts, she's free to leave the brothel. But the challenge is that if you didn't go to school during your teenage years, you didn't learn how to read or write. So there's no way that you're going to be able to find a job. Add that to the stigma of all the people in the Tangai area that know you that you are a sex worker and live in the brothel. It's very difficult to leave without someone or an organization that could help. So they end up staying, and they continue to support their families if they end up pregnant and work as sex workers without an education. So here is the entrance to the brothel, and they have different openings like this, and the sex workers will gather or sit there waiting for the local population, the local men to come by. Most of the men that come into this type of a brothel are not foreigners, they're local people, and local men that are in the area. And many of these women have a babu, which is like a boyfriend or a particular special guy that they have a relationship with, and they also have other men that they're having sex with as well. So this is a typical room in a brothel for a sex worker with bamboo sides. It usually has a metal roof. There's no bathroom except at the end of the long corridors where you walk to the end, and there are these little rooms like this that are off of each with a door that are off of their row. And cooking is outside, usually on a hibachi. And the bathrooms are at the end. There are no showers. There's a spigot for running water. And so it's a real challenge. It's definitely a real challenge. This is probably about the size of smaller than a dorm room if you're in college, and smaller than about the size of a master bathroom in our country. So, and brothel housing looks like this. So you can see these long rows, and as you look down this alley, those blue doors that you see are the openings into these rooms. And then you'll see this other teenager that is one of the sex workers. They have a light bulb at the top and electricity. They have to pay rent for these rooms to the madams, and they have to pay electricity bill as well to the madam. So it's this huge maze of little alleys and tea stalls and other little kiosks where they might sell food, etc., and that are throughout this big football-sized field of the brothel, the Tangai brothel. So these are the sex workers, and sex workers are not treated like normal residents, and they have no freedom or any rights, as I mentioned to you. In the past 10 years, women could not go outside of the brothel with sandals on. They had to go in their bare feet. And they also couldn't wear their saris on the left side. They had to wear their saris on the right side, and that would identify them as a sex worker. So the madams that you saw in an early photograph actually protested a lot of this, and some of them went off to jail because they were demanding the rights that we should wear sandals outside and we should wear our saris if we want to. So they were actually given those rights to be able to wear a pair of sandals outside of the brothel. These women live in extremely difficult situations and circumstances, and most of the time they become a sex worker out of desperation, not necessarily their choice. They could be born in the brothel, and some of them, as I mentioned, have been trafficked into Bangladesh from Nepal, from India, and even from Bangladesh itself. There are 11 brothels in the country, and these are legalized places where people can go for sex workers, to see the sex workers and to participate. Many of them have no secure housing. Some of them lived on the street or in other brothels and ended up coming to this one. They are not able, if they do get pregnant, not able to give their children a decent education. And there's no real formal way of them to accumulate any savings except to try to save money under your mattress, for example, but not being able to take it to a bank. So inside the Tangai brothel, you see women like this and girls like this lined up on the side waiting for the men to come by. There, as I mentioned, food stalls, which you can see here. And the women in most of these brothels are really treated like dirt in broad daylight. And because of their profession, they face a lot of hatred, a lot of violence in everyday life, a lot of fights going on, a lot of drug abuse going on, and they're extremely ostracized by society. And they carry this unjust burden of social stigma tremendously. And there are some NGOs in the world that work in the brothels to help educate women and help to empower them. And that can be a real challenge because you're making what you would think would be a lot of money could be about $15 a day, having to have sex with men 6 to 10 times a day. And if that's more money than they might make if they were working, selling something on the street. So they're stuck in the Kandapara brothel. So here's another example of women waiting for people to come in, and they look at sex, that sex work is work. This is work. This is not a joy. This is what they have to do. And if you don't really have a choice, if you're not able to read or write and you lack these opportunities to change your life, so what's left? You know, you have sex work is what's left. So, but in the long run, all women want something better. We all do, even women here in our country. You know, they want a better life for their children. They want more economic freedom, and they want respect. We definitely all want that. So there are many challenges in the brothel. There are children that are born of sex workers. There are young sex workers that are trafficked in. There are older women that are no longer working in the that are still living in the brothel because they are no longer attractive to men, so they don't have any clients. So what do they do? How are they supported? These elderly sex workers, who takes care of them when they're sick? And the expenses, it's expensive to survive in a brothel because, you know, you might be making $1.50 to $2 a trick. So you're making $10 to $15 a day, but it may seem like a lot of money to the young girls, but it isn't in the long run because you can never get yourself out of poverty. So then you're born in the brothel. And this is an example of a little, I think it's a little girl that was born in the brothel. And the woman that's caring for her is the mother of the daughter that delivered this baby. So the mother was born in the brothel, was pregnant, had a daughter. The daughter is now a sex worker and had this baby. And no one really wants to get pregnant in the brothel. However, if you do get pregnant in the brothel, you want to have a girl, because that means that's your potential retirement fund, is to have a daughter, so that you can put that daughter in the sex industry in the future, and then your daughter will be able to make money to help support you in your later years. So life in the brothel is sad, and you could tell that by this woman that's sitting on the side, on the right. It's very sad, it's very overwhelming, it's very depressing. I mean, we interview all women that come with us. We have a big questionnaire, we gather a lot of data on them, we listen to their concerns and their what they would really like to do. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that as we go through some of these personal stories. So this is a story about Cynthia. This woman we met in 2014. She was born in the brothel, and she grew up in the brothel, and she had a son. And her son, she educated her son. Usually the boys go to school and the sex workers save their money, and then they save their money and they send them off to school or outside to live with someone else. And she wanted to get pregnant again, and her son didn't want her to get pregnant, and she never ended up getting pregnant. But she bought this young girl when the baby was 2 weeks old, and she bought this young girl, Cynthia, and she brought her in to live in the brothel, and she brought her up, and she came to our clinic in 2014, and she brought Cynthia, and Cynthia was about 7. And just a beautiful little girl running around, and very sad situation. And the mom wanted us to provide her with funding so that she could send her daughter to a school. And we were in the throes of trying to provide a orphanage where this young girl could go. And then she wouldn't let the girl leave. So then they were evicted. Remember I mentioned that the landlord evicted all the sex workers. And so they decided, kept this young girl, and she decided that she would move. And so she never came back to the brothel. And now they're living about 3 hours away outside of the brothel, and she's selling clothing on the street. And Cynthia is going to school and may have lucked out and may not end up being a sex worker, which is really great. So we keep in touch with her whenever we arrive over there. We call her, the mother, and make sure, and she comes down to visit us at the brothel, and we're trying to really support Cynthia and make sure she stays in school. So this story is a story of 3 sisters. The one in the left is the oldest sister, and she is 27 years old. The one in the middle that's holding on to the daughter is 22, and then the younger one is about 18 now. And they are sisters. And little video. And this is the picture of them last March in 2019. They have the same mom and 3 different fathers. The middle one was pregnant when she was a teenager and had this little girl. And her mother died. Their mother was a drug addict, and the mother died. And the oldest sex worker here, the one over here on the right in the photograph, really wants to leave and has wanted to leave. She doesn't owe the madams anything. She could leave. She doesn't know how to read or write. None of them know how to read or write, but she doesn't want to leave her sisters behind. So that's why she's staying, and she's stuck at the moment. And all three of them have stuck. However, through what's been happening with Partners for World Health is that we had an opportunity to really talk to several of them this past year in March of 2019 about making a choice. And we'll talk a little bit more about this social enterprise called the Rising Up Project that Partners for World Health wants to start. And these three women have made a choice. They have decided that if we can create this enterprise, they are willing to come and to move out of the brothel. So we'll see how that all unfolds, which we'll talk a little bit about. This is another young girl, 12 or 13 years old, that started in the sex industry. She stopped going to school, probably in the first grade. She doesn't know how to read or write. She was born in the brothel. She was pregnant in 2017, and in 2018, she had a baby, and now you can see this little baby here, a little girl. And it's really difficult to break this cycle. She is older now. I think she's about 17 or 18 now, and you can see how beautiful she is. And these young girls, these young teenagers are really loud, outspoken. They are living in this abusive situation in this brothel. And they're teenagers, and they think they have everything under control. They are making money with all of these tricks, and they're able to buy things and look pretty, and they are not interested in leaving the brothel because they are a typical teenager that's reacting to all of this. So they don't care. And so they're not the right choice for us to be able to take them out of the brothel at this point in time. So this gal was a 22. When I met her, she was 22. She was married at 17. And after a year of being beaten by her husband, she left her husband, and she couldn't find a job. And she ended up, someone found her and said, I can show you to the brothel. So that's how she ended up coming to the brothel at about age 17. I think she came to the brothel when she was about 19. She ended up becoming pregnant, and she delivered this child with a significant cleft palate. And when I met her, it was really a sad situation because her family, her mother and father, think she has a job in Tangai, but doesn't know that she's a member of the brothel and working in the sex industry. So we were able to work with another NGO and paid about $150 in order to have this cleft palate fixed. And then she sent this child to live with her parents, and that she stayed in the Tangai area. So it's a really sad situation for people in the sex industry. This is a little boy that will eventually go to school and not end up coming back to the brothel at all. So this is a mother-daughter team. You know, the mother on the left was born in the brothel, and she delivered her little girl who grew up to be a sex worker. And she died in 2018 from childbirth. She delivered a baby in the brothel, and they didn't take her to the hospital, and she bled, has postpartum hemorrhage, and she died of bleeding, which is extremely sad and totally unnecessary. That would not happen here in our country, and wouldn't have happened if they had taken her to the hospital, more than likely. So this is Shamali. This is a picture of her that I took on the left with her mother on the right, and Shamali when she was probably 12 or 13 years old in 2013. Her mother is a drug addict, and put her daughter in the sex industry, as you can see here on the left. when she was extremely young. And you can tell she's just going through puberty at this point in time. So really incredible situation. This is Shamali on the left, and this other gal that we showed you before that had a baby in the brothel in 2014. And you can see how they're both growing up. And then this is Shamali in 2015 and 2019. So this is when we saw her in March of 2019, and she is like a typical teenager. She has the answers to everything. She knows how to do everything. She's a smart aleck type of attitude, and she's not really facing the real reality of this business as a sex worker. And they probably won't face it until they're about 25. In their mid-20s, then they realize that, I don't want to do this anymore. And I also am not having not as many people are interested in me anymore because I'm old. Old in your young 20s, you're old because there are a lot of young girls that are coming into the brothel as you grow up. She is not pregnant or wasn't pregnant back then, and I hope that she will remain that way. So this is Asha. Asha came here to the brothel. So first time I met her was in 2019. She speaks English somewhat, not fluently, but she does speak English. And she knows how to read and write. She is came here with her mother and her aunt, and that a younger girl that's in front is the daughter of the aunt. So Asha is the one that is supporting the mother and the aunt in the brothel. And Asha is another one that has made a commitment to Partners for World Health's program of the Rising Up Project that will be willing to come with us when we initiate this social enterprise. So this is one of my favorite ladies and that I've watched over the last several years. And she was born in the brothel. She never had any children. And this to me represents the saddest part of the brothel because there are many women that never had the opportunity to leave the brothel. And now they're old and they cannot work. And they have the same challenges that any elderly person faces, even in our country. They have the same aches and pains and healthcare issues and poor eyesight and forgetfulness and limited food. And the big difference here is that we have a government that helps our elderly people. We have food banks. We take care of you if you're sick. And even if you don't have the money, we'll put you in the hospital and we'll pay for it. So, but in the brothel for the elderly people, that's not available. And this is why many reasons why, if they do get pregnant, they're praying for a girl so that they would have some source of an income by the daughter in the future. This lady never had any children, and so she begs every day for food, and people will give her little bits here and there, and other people will help to pay for her room where she stays. And each year I go back, I wonder if I'm going to see her again. So this picture was taken in March of 2019. So what are we doing? What are we going to do about this? So we're starting a program called the Rising Up Project. And this is in the beginning stages of creating a social enterprise to help the sex workers. And we've identified, as I mentioned and showed you, 4 sex workers who are interested in making a change in their life and willing to leave. And what we're planning on doing is creating a recycling program of fabric from all of the saris that are worn by the rich women. They wear their saris for 2 or 3 times and then they don't wear them anymore and they're discarded. So we want to collect all of those recycled saris and teach our sex workers, teach these women how to create designs like quilts and pillow shams and pocketbooks out of this recycled fabric. So then we want to sell these items in the Western market in Europe and in the United States and make money so that we will bring this money back into this population of women that we have taken out of the brothel and they would have a source of an income. And then if we are successful, which I think we might be, I think we will be successful if we make sure that we interview the women and we have commitments from them that they really want to do this. And then we'll be able to raise some significant funding. So we're in the middle of writing a grant actually for the implementation of this program. This would include those women that would come out, and we would have to find an alternative living situation for them, which would not be in the Tangai area, because we don't want anybody to know that they were coming from a brothel because of the stigma that's associated with it. We would have to provide education and training for the new vocation that they would be learning. We'd also have to provide education and training to teach them how to speak, how to read and write, and Asha would be coming with that young girl. So that young girl would have to go to school, and we would be supporting that. So it's not an inexpensive venture, which is why we are applying for a grant. And this is really important because these women, these girls are caught in a system, and they really want to make a significant change in their life, but they're not able to do it because they're caught in the system. And we're going to be able to generate an income for them and a business that will make money. And we will use some of this money to bring out the next 4 people or the next 5 sex workers the following year. And we will use some of that money to help take care of the elderly. And this is the place, which is inside the brothel, this open space where I want to build a U-shaped building. And this is not going to be easy. This project is not simple, but it's called commitment. That's what it is. It's commitment to something. And we can accomplish this over time through this Rising Up project. And what this U-shaped building will hold will be room areas for the elderly sex workers. There will be a healthcare clinic that will be open during the day for all of the healthcare, all of the sex workers and their children. And then there will be an opportunity for education for the children that are actually living in the brothel, and a place for them to go when their mothers are involved in their work during the day. So this will be a safe place for these children to go to. So as I mentioned, we are raising funds through grants and donations that will offer a place for the elderly to stay in this healthcare clinic. We have a partner in Bangladesh called the Rotary Club of the Dhaka Mavericks, who have significant connections, and they have come with me to the brothel. They've seen it. They've met a lot of these people, and they will help us because we're going to need people to help implement the program over there, and quite possibly have people that might spend a month or 2 months at a time living in Bangladesh working in this program. So it's something that would probably be of interest to students or people that are going on to get their master's in public health, to be able to have this opportunity to live in an environment, in a safe environment. You wouldn't be living in the brothel. I'm not going to set up a house for you in the brothel, but to have this experience to monitor this program and help it get off the ground. So sometimes we really need to offer some help because everybody needs a way out. And we have had incredible opportunities in our lives here in this country, and now it's time to give something back before we all take that one-way trip without a suitcase, as my mother used to tell me. And whatever you're doing in our country to make a difference for those in need, for children, for the disabled, for the elderly, whatever it might be, I just want to say thank you for doing your part and doing that. And if you would like an opportunity to participate in something definitely not mainstream, and this is definitely not mainstream, to make a difference, then PWH would really welcome your interest and your participation. So just send us an email. Send me an email, or Michaela, or info@partnersforworldhealth.org, and we will definitely reach out to you to help you get involved. And so I will end by saying that we need to remember to reach out and find something that you really believe in. And it may not be this Rising Up project or PWH. It may be the homeless, or it may be the disabled or children with autism, but find something that you can make a commitment to that's greater than your own self-interest, and watch it take off and watch it grow. And we all need to do this, and we can. All we have to do is try. That's all we have to do. So thank you for listening to my story about my new friends in the brothel. Thank you.
All right.
So
Wow.
we have a few questions or not?
We have one question.
One question.
Guys, I just want to say, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll get through a few. I know we've run over the hour a bit, but we can do it. We can do it, and then we'll pick a couple prizes. Okay, so one question we have from May, hold on. Elizabeth, do you feel that there would be a persuasive way to reach the younger girls to leave the brothel? In other words, exposing them to a wider perspective that may open their minds up, whether that be travel, education, of other opportunities, or a way of life?
Yeah, I do think that there's probably a way to reach the younger group. But it has to be something, a program that would be developed and implemented, and you would have to be there every day in order to make sure that they were participating in what you had created. Because if you're not there, or you don't have somebody there that is able to stay on top of it, then they may go right back to what they were doing before. So that's a really hard thing to do, especially if we're not living over there. So that would be something to work on. Definitely something to work on. Right now, if they need money, and they do need money to pay for their rent, to pay for their electricity, to pay for their food, etc. So if something involved money, that might be somewhat of a stimulus. That's why we've been looking at the Rising Up project for those people that want to make a choice.
All right. Question 2 from Nathan Isaacs. Overall, is there more women in the brothel than want to stay, or more than want to leave and can't? Is there more that want to stay, or more that want to leave and can't?
I think there are a lot of the older women that are not interested in leaving. And in our questionnaire, we always ask them, we talk about that, and we ask them, if you had an option, if you had an opportunity to leave, would you go? Would you be interested in learning another profession, another vocation? And many of the older women have said, no, I'm staying here. They don't want to. I mean, they've been involved in the sex industry for 20, 30 years, and they don't want to go. But the younger ones may have an interest in going, especially those that when they hit the mid-20s, they're going to say to themselves, I don't want to do this anymore. But I don't know how to get out of it because I didn't go to school. So that's where an NGO could come in and help.
And then from Adrian Dolly, how long do you think it would take for the Rising Up project to make a significant effect?
Well, if we take 4 people out of the brothel, 4 or 5 people, I think within a year we would see an impact. And then we would want to take 4 or 5 more people, and maybe we could even take more. But the challenge would be, is the funding. How are we really going to fund this? That's why we have to create something, a product that we could sell to be able to raise the money to bring that back in to keep the program going. We cannot depend on donors all the time. We cannot depend on writing a grant. We have to figure out how to pay for this ourselves, how to generate an income, how to generate a business. And that's what's really important. And people will feel better about that. I mean, women will feel better, and other people that are seeing the success of it will feel better because we are paying for it ourselves. So I think in a year, we can see some significant progress with the people that are coming out. We might, out of 5 people, maybe 3, maybe those 3 sisters, 2 want to really stay and participate, but maybe 1 doesn't. So we may not be 100% successful with 4 people, but I cannot take 25 out at once because I know that would be a real challenge and we wouldn't be successful. So we have to start small and grow this. So if you stick with something long enough, you learn how to do it. That's exactly what we've done here at Partners of World Health, and we've become successful. So I would plan on sticking with this and bringing more people into the Rising Up project.
We'll do one more question because it's from two different people who have the same question. Josh Passarelli and Laura Mirton want to know, do you think you'll receive pushback from the madams or brothel owners who may lose sex workers from this social project?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We have talked to the madams about this, and they are interested in supporting the program, especially for, obviously they're not interested in supporting the ones that are the girls that are still bonded to the madams, but those women that are no longer bonded, that are free sex workers, they have said to us that we would let them go. We don't have a choice to keep them. They have the right to leave if they want to leave. So they would lose their money in terms of the rent and the electric bill. That's what they would lose. But there's somebody else that would be able to come in and pay them that rent that would go into that little house. And I think that if we were to find 100 people at once to take out, then you'd see an uproar. But it's taken us several years to build up a relationship with them. And that's where now we have a really good relationship with them. So they don't see us as coming in and taking over. We're just creating another opportunity and an opportunity for women to have a choice. So they're pretty supportive of this.